Okay, I'm going to talk some more about a topic I talked about before, and that's about foolish consistency. Thinking about Emerson's famous statement, his quote, "A foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds." And I get to thinking about things, about religion a lot. You know, I think if I could go back to when I first started with YouTube, I think the first thing I would have done would have been to never say what my religious position was and just leave it a mystery, you know. But because I think it's unimportant. I think it doesn't matter what I believe. I think people focus too much on what people believe. I think people shouldn't know if I'm an atheist or if I'm a believer or not. But if you watch all my videos, you know what my thoughts are. The thing is, it's not really important. But what is important is this. I get to thinking about the Bible. I actually like to read the Bible a lot. Not all the time, but I read it. It's really interesting and fascinating. But I put it in perspective, though. See, I think there are a lot of people who are very consistent. Or at least they try to be. They try. They struggle to be consistent. They never really can be. But, they try to say, well, I believe in the Bible, and I believe in everything in the Bible, and I follow everything in the Bible, and I do everything. You couldn't. Even if you wanted to. You really cannot do everything that the Bible says do. Because if you did, you'd wind up in prison. You'd have to stone people. You really would. I mean, you'd have to do a lot of terrible things to people if you followed exactly what that was, as if it were an instruction book. If I could look at my instruction book on how to operate my, let's say, my DVD player or something, I follow it, and that only. I don't grab another book or something else. I follow the instructions, like the instructions for how to operate my insulin pump. The doctors explained that to me. They told me they actually had to learn that. I went to a class actually even to learn how to deal with that thing. You don't use those same instructions and apply it every place else. It only applies to this one thing. I think that, someone made a video, and I don't even remember now what the name of that video was, so I can't find it. I had to look for it. But this one guy was saying something that was interesting to me. That, and I agree with him. At least I think I look at the world the way he does, in certain ways. In understanding that, there are a lot of people who criticize you if you believe in God, or you say you believe in God. You say it because they believe this one thing. The people who criticize anybody who believes in God assumes something. They make an assumption. And the assumption is that this is all that you live in a vacuum that consists only of this book. That you don't read anything else. That you don't read, I have actually Richard Dawkins' book, which I've read all the way through. I read The God Delusion. And I found a lot of things he says I agree with. Not everything. But there are a lot of things he said that makes a lot of sense. I have Christopher Hitchens' book. I have all the books of the Four Horsemen, as they call themselves. I read a lot of other books. I read Aldous Huxley. He's one of my favorite writers too. I love this guy. I read this book all the way through. It's a very good book. I recommend it. It's actually a series of essays. I read so many different books, science books. I read books, a lot of Abraham Maslow. I have his book. I'm not going to just grab every book I see, but I've read just about everything Maslow ever wrote. He's one of my favorite writers. I read David Hume, so many other people. I don't live in a vacuum. If you say that you believe in God, then you have to deny science, and you have to do this, and the people who say that assume that's true. That's an assumption. And they stick to that assumption, which is itself a kind of foolish consistency. They disregard all evidence to the contrary. And when you see somebody who says, a person says, I believe in God. Oh, well, that means that you think this way, and you think that way, and you believe this, and you believe that, and you would do this, and you think that, and you do this, and you're against evolution, and you this, that, and the other thing, and whatever. No, that's not true. And they say, well, you have to be that way. You just have to be that. It's like the person who believes in an 8-sided triangle. Imagine there's this person who believes that there's such a thing as an 8-sided triangle. And they will not budge on that. They will stay consistent with that for the rest of their life. For 50 years, they believe, until their dying day. Their last words as they take their last breath is, long live the 8-sided triangle. Boom, and then they drop dead. They don't change what they believe. They don't, every math teacher and every person in the world try to explain to them, there is no such thing as an 8-sided triangle. What you're talking about is an octagon, okay? They won't budge. So I compare it to that. People who believe a certain thing about people who believe in God. And the same thing goes on the other side of the coin. People who think that people who don't believe in God are a certain way. They think that people who don't believe in God they people with no morals, no anything. They would kill everybody. They would do anything because they have no moral compass. As I remember what Steve Harvey said. They have no moral compass or anything else. So they, and people are consistent with that. Again, that's foolish consistency. My thing is that I believe a lot of different things that might seem contradictory in some people's minds. But, if you get to know me and listen to me, you find out what I actually think. You can't just look at somebody else and know everything about me. And I know that that's the same thing would be true with me to you. If I were getting to know you personally, I'd have to get to know you. Not just assume that because you're a certain way, maybe because you're a man. Well, if I know this man over here, I know what you are. Because you're a woman. Or if I know this woman, then I know who you are. Maybe if you're a Catholic, or if you're a Catholic, then you're like this. I don't even have to get to know you. I just pick up the book on it. Find out, what do Catholics believe? Okay, you believe this, you believe this, you believe... and some people say, well, I don't believe, and I don't agree with that, and I don't think... So, wait a minute, you're a Catholic. You're supposed to believe this. You can't know people without actually getting to know people. One thing I learned from philosophy is that all knowledge must be based on experience. If you really want to get to know people, interact with people, talk to people, listen, pay attention. Don't just assume things and then stick to your assumption despite any evidence that runs contrary to your assumption. If the evidence runs contrary to your assumption, then that means your assumption is wrong. Of course, you could think the other way. If all the evidence runs contrary to my assumption, then all the evidence is wrong. You could think that way. And that way you can stay consistent, of course. And then you can say, well, being consistent is a virtue. To never waver on what you believe is a virtue. To stick to a belief and to never change it. No, I believe things, and if evidence runs contrary to it, then I change it. That's all. I can change my mind, just like what Emerson says. Think what today thinks. And then think what tomorrow thinks. Don't worry about it. If you change your mind, you change your mind, and that's okay. You don't have to be consistent. At least not in some foolish way of being consistent.